So, you know that old philosophical riddle, right? The ship of Theseus?
Oh, right, the one with the wooden planks?
Yeah, exactly. You have a ship, and over time, you replace every single wooden plank. Every mast, every sail, piece by piece.
Right.
And by the end, the question is it still the same ship? And usually that's a question for a philosophy seminar or maybe a late-night dorm room debate.
Right.
But looking at the research stack you brought in for our deep dive today, it looks like we're actually treating that riddle as an instruction manual.
We really are. It's wild. But instead of wooden planks and sails, we are talking about biological engineering. Specifically, we're diving into a paper by Enkamgalan Nasanjargal titled Regional Cellular Reconstitution.
Regional cellular reconstitution. Which, I mean, sounds deceptively bureaucratic, right? Like something you'd have to file at the DMV.
It does sound a bit dry.
Yeah. But from what I've read here, it is effectively proposing that we rebuild the human body, infrastructure, and all, while we are literally still living inside it.
It is a truly radical proposition. What Nasanjargal is doing here is moving the conversation entirely away from the traditional idea of aging. Because, we usually think of aging as wear and tear.
Like tires going bald on a car or a door hinge getting rusty.
Precisely. But this paper reframes it as something called infinite descent.
Which sounds like the title of a sci-fi horror movie, frankly.
It does have a certain ominous ring to it, I'll give you that.
Yeah.
But it's actually a description of recursive information loss. The argument is that aging isn't just your physical parts breaking down, it's the actual instructions for fixing those parts getting garbled. And the paper argues that if we can stop this descent, we can engineer lifelong resilience for you, for anyone.
And the strategy they lay out isn't just a magic pill you swallow. It's essentially a massive civil engineering project to the human body. The paper outlines 3 distinct phases to solve this. There's priming the factory, a slow flush of the junk, and then managing the handoff to new cells.
Correct. It's a systemic renovation. You can't just paint over the cracks in the walls. You have to replace the foundation.
So let's start with the problem itself then. If aging isn't just wear and tear, what exactly is this infinite descent? Because normally when I feel old, it just feels like sheer physical exhaustion.
It definitely feels physical to us, but the root cause is purely informational. It comes down to the signal-to-noise ratio, or SNR. Think of a single cell in your body like a pilot flying a plane through a massive storm.
Okay.
The pilot is receiving constant instructions from the control tower. Repair this DNA strand, fold this protein over here, secrete this enzyme now.
And the noise in this analogy is what? Just static on the radio?
Exactly, but biological static. Metabolic noise, random chemical chatter, oxidative stress, maybe some misfolded proteins floating by. The paper states that when the signal-to-noise ratio drops below 1.0, the pilot, well, the cell, can no longer distinguish between a vital command from the tower and just random static on the line.
So the cell isn't actually dead, it's just completely confused, it's flying blind.
Consistently confused, yes. And this noise isn't just some abstract mathematical concept. It physically manifests inside the cell as something called a clog. And this is where the paper gets really interesting because it treats this biological clog as a physics problem.
I want to drill down on this clog concept because the paper gets incredibly specific about the structure. We aren't just talking about general debris or dust bunnies in the corner of the cell here.
No, we're talking about p62 aggresomes. And to understand this, you really have to visualize liquid phase separation.
Right.
Imagine a bottle of vinaigrette dressing. You shake it up and it mixes perfectly. But you let it sit on the counter and the oil separates from the vinegar into these distinct droplets.
Okay, I'm with you. It's separation based on density or chemistry.
Right. Inside an aging cell, proteins act exactly like that oil. They separate out of the liquid solution and condense, specifically a protein called p62. Now, normally, p62 is a good guy. It's an adapter protein. It grabs cellular trash, ubiquitinated cargo to be specific, and drags it over to the recycling plant, which is the autophagy machinery.
But in this infinite descent scenario we're talking about, the recycling plant is essentially shut down.
Right, it's offline, so the p62 starts to just pile up. But it doesn't just form a messy heap. The paper describes these aggresomes forming very specific left-handed double helical filaments.
Wow.
Yeah, they actually crystallize. They have a highly specific pitch of 150 angstroms. So it's not a pile of garbage. It's a structured, crystallized traffic jam.
And that structure is what makes them so dangerous, right? It's not just taking up physical space. The paper used the analogy of a black hole which seems a bit dramatic.
It sounds dramatic, but it's actually a perfect analogy for the physics of what's happening. These filaments become black hole signaling hubs. Because they are so unbelievably dense, they start trapping things that have absolutely no business being there. They sequester vital proteins.
The paper actually mentioned a specific protein getting caught, FIP200.
Yes, FIP200. It has a specific domain called the claw. It's designed to grab onto things. But when P62 forms these dense, crystallized filaments, it essentially physically snags the claw of FIP200. And this creates a total signaling blackout. It prevents other crucial proteins, like beta-catenin, from moving into the nucleus.
So beta-catenin is supposed to go to the nucleus to tell the cell to divide or repair itself, but it's just getting stuck in the P62 traffic jam.
Precisely. So the cell isn't just dirty at this point, it is blind and mute. It can't receive new instructions, and it can't execute any repairs because the messengers are all trapped in the black hole.
See, here's the part that always frustrates me about biology. If my house gets messy, I just clean it. If I see a pile of trash, I take it out to the curb. Why does the cell just sit there and let this black hole grow? Why not just flush it out?
Because the cell enters a zombie state. The technical term is the integrated stress response, or ISR. You can think of it as a biological pause button. When the cell realizes it's stressed, when it says, hey, there's a huge clog here, it hits pause on all standard protein production to save energy.
Which makes perfect sense in a short-term emergency.
Yeah.
You don't keep cooking dinner if the kitchen is actively on fire. You stop and grab the fire extinguisher.
Exactly. But here is the mechanism that traps it in that state. It's called the stoichiometric trap. This is really the key insight of the paper regarding why these cells get stuck forever. There's a specific molecule called EIF2. It's a major player in starting protein synthesis. But for EIF2 to do its job, it needs a helper molecule called EIF2B.
Okay, so EIF2 is the manager, and EIF2B is the assistant with the keys to the cabinet.
Sure, that works. But here's the catch. Inside the cell, EIF2 outnumbers its helper 30 to 1. There is a massive excess of managers and very few assistants.
That seems incredibly inefficient for a biological system.
It's actually designed as a hair trigger safety mechanism. When the stress response is triggered, the EIF2 gets phosphorylated. It gets chemically tagged. And because of that 30 to 1 ratio, if just 10% of the EIF2 gets tagged, it physically binds up 100% of the helpers.
Wait, let me just run that math real quick.
Right.
Because there are so many managers, if only a small fraction of them panic and grab an assistant, there are literally 0 assistants left for all the healthy managers.
You got it. It locks all the keys in the car. And because the machinery is locked, the cell can't build the enzymes it needs to clean up the clog. It's a total catch-22. It's too stressed out to clean, and because it can't clean, the stress just gets worse, so it becomes a zombie. Metabolically alive, but functionally useless.
So we have these tissues completely full of these zombie cells locked in a panic room, full of crystallized trash, and that perfectly sets the stage for the solution proposed in the paper. We can't fix these cells, so we just have to replace them entirely. Which brings us to phase 1 of the protocol, priming the factory. But we immediately run into a supply chain issue, don't we?
We do. The factory for new cells in your body is our mesenchymal stem cells, or MSCs. But in an older person, that factory is tired too. Primary MSCs usually start dividing after about 7 to 12 passages. They hit their own hard biological limit, known as the Hayflick limit.
So if we just try to stimulate them natively, we're basically just whipping a tired horse.
Effectively, yes. So the paper proposes a major upgrade first. They call it transient telomerase activation, or TTA. They use nucleoside-modified mRNA to deliver a very specific instruction to these stem cells. It basically says, make human telomerase. Make chert.
Now, telomerase is the enzyme that lengthens the caps on our DNA, right? The telomeres. That's usually associated with keeping cells young.
Correct. And the protocol they outline is very specific. It's not a permanent genetic change. We aren't going in and editing the genome. They do 3 transfections over 4 days. It's just a pulse.
A temporary boost. What does that actually get us in terms of output, though?
It extends the telomeres by about 0.9 kilobases. Now, that might sound incredibly small, but biologically, it grants the cell an extra 28 population doublings. It refuels the factory for a massive, massive production run.
I have to play devil's advocate here, though.
Yeah.
Because whenever I hear telomerase and unlimited cell division in the same sentence, I immediately think of cancer. Cancer cells absolutely love telomerase. Are we just giving ourselves super cancer with this?
That is the most common fear, and the paper addresses it head on. The operative word here is transient. Because the mRNA breaks down naturally after a few days, the effect is entirely temporary. The cells do not become immortal.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, eventually they show senescence markers again, specifically P16INK4A, so we aren't changing the fundamental zoning laws to allow infinite construction. We're just approving a very generous overtime package for the renovation crew.
Okay, I really like that distinction. It's a contract gig, not tenure. So phase 1 is done. We've supercharged our stem cells, and the factory is fully stocked. Now we have to move to phase 2, the cleanup, because we still have to get rid of the zombie cells with the black holes inside them.
And this is where we get into the smart weapons. The paper introduces nanobody drug conjugates, or NDCs. But these aren't just your standard pharmaceutical drugs. They are engineered as megamolecules.
Megamolecules, that implies a very specific architecture.
It refers to the stoichiometry again, the ratio of the parts. They use a 1N to 2E structure. That means one nanobody attached to 2 enzyme domains.
Why double up on the enzymes, though?
It allows for intramolecular dimerization. Basically, having 2 enzyme domains makes the molecule 8 times more efficient at doing its job once it finally lands on a target.
But the landing is the hard part, right? How does this drug know the difference between a zombie cell and a healthy cell? Because healthy cells have P62 in them also. If this drug just attacks P62, well, it just kill everything.
This is honestly the genius of the design. It relies entirely on the difference between affinity and avidity.
Okay, break that down for us, because I usually use those two words interchangeably.
A lot of people do. Affinity is how well one thing sticks to another single thing, like a single hand grabbing a metal bar.
Right.
Avidity is the cumulative strength of multiple connection points. Think of a gecko using thousands of tiny microscopic hairs to stick to a glass wall.
Okay, so how does that gecko analogy apply to the cell?
In a healthy cell, the P62 is just floating around freely. It's singular. The drug has very low affinity for these single floating molecules. It basically just bounces off them. It ignores them completely.
Oh, I see. But the zombie cells have those crystallized filaments you mentioned, the clumps.
Exactly. This allows the drug to use avidity. Because the target is a giant clustered structure, the drug can latch on with multiple points of contact. It's like Velcro. One single hook doesn't stick to anything, but 1,000 hooks against the filament create a bond that is functionally impossible to break. So the drug only ever latches on to the dense clumps.
That is incredibly clever.
Yeah.
It filters by physical structure, not just chemistry. So it latches onto the trash pile. Then what happens?
Then it triggers a switch. The agent targets the specific interface between P62 and ubiquitin. This causes a cargo loading failure. The cell essentially realizes it can't process its trash anymore, and this triggers the accumulation of a specific protein called NBK-BIC on the membrane of the endoplasmic reticulum.
And NBK-BIC is the executioner.
Essentially, yes. It flips the cell from pause to self-destruct. It initiates apoptosis.
Now, you mentioned safety earlier with the stem cells. Is there a safety mechanism built in here too? Because we definitely don't want this megamolecule floating around in our bloodstream forever.
There is a very elegant one. The agent is built with a suicide linker. It's highly sensitive to proteases. Once the drug delivers its payload and kills the target cell, the linker snaps.
So it breaks itself in half.
Yes. It ensures single turnover kinetics. One bullet, one kill. The drug destroys the target cell and destroys itself in the exact same process. It completely prevents the active agent from leaking out and harming any healthy neighbors later on.
And just to clarify the delivery for everyone listening, this isn't a pill you swallow with your morning coffee. The paper talks about doing this region by region.
Right. Regional is right there in the title. The procedure is described as isolated limb perfusion or using microcatheters. You basically isolate an arm or a leg or a specific organ, you treat it, you let the drugs do their work, and then you perform a slow flush with saline to literally wash out all the cellular debris before you reconnect that region to the rest of the body.
That slow flush seems critical. You definitely don't want dead zombie cell parts floating back up into your heart or brain.
Exactly. You have to take the trash all the way out. You can't just sweep it into the hallway.
Okay, so let's check our progress on the protocol. We've primed the factory in phase 1. We've targeted and flushed out the zombies with these smart Velcro drugs in phase 2. Now we have these literal empty microscopic spaces in the tissue where the old cells used to be. Which brings us to phase 3, the handoff. How do the new stem cells know where to go?
This is the coordination phase. The Nano-Agent system actually releases a triple signal sequence. It's like a highly tuned traffic control system for biology.
What is signal number one?
Signal 1 is SDF1. You can think of this as a flare gun. It's a homing signal. It tells the CXCR4 positive stem cells, those supercharged ones we made back in phase 1, to migrate directly to this specific empty location.
And the paper notes this specific signal has a very short half-life, right? Less than 15 minutes.
Which is crucial for the logistics. You do not want stem cells wandering off to the wrong neighborhood hours later. The flare goes up, the cells arrive quickly, and the signal fades out.
Once they arrive, though, they need to know what to actually do. That's signal 2, HGF.
Right, HGF is the behavior switch, and it works entirely based on local concentration. At high concentrations, around 100 nanograms per milliliter, it activates the ERK12 pathway. This screams at the new cells, multiply, fill the empty space.
So you obviously don't want them to multiply forever, or you just get a tumor.
Exactly. As the cells rapidly fill the physical space, they naturally consume the HGF. So the concentration drops down to about 20 nanograms per milliliter. This lower level flips the switch. It activates an entirely different pathway called CMAD-ACT. And that pathway tells the cells, okay, start multiplying and start differentiating, become heart cells, become muscle cells.
That is just so elegant. The population density itself controls the behavior. And finally, we have signal 3.
PDGF, this is the integration signal. It stabilizes the scaffolding, the extracellular matrix, and it physically connects the new tissue to the blood supply. This is so critical because if you don't get blood flow reestablished quickly, the body will panic and just patch the hole with thick scar tissue. PDGF ensures you get healthy, vascularized tissue instead of a permanent scar.
It's an amazing orchestration, honestly.
Yeah.
Flare gun, multiply, then differentiate switch, and then plumbing hookup.
It has to be perfectly orchestrated. Biological engineering is all about timing. If you get the timing even slightly wrong, you just get biological chaos.
Let's look at some specific case studies in the paper where this would actually apply in the real world. They discuss the aging heart quite a bit. Now, old hearts are notoriously stiff.
They are, and usually medical science thinks that's just because the scaffold itself, the physical matrix, is old and brittle. But the paper suggests something fascinating. When you introduce these brand new young cells into the old heart, they display young ligands on their surface.
So the new kids on the block actually influence the bad neighborhood.
Yes. These young ligands effectively communicate with the surrounding older tissue. They tell the cardiac fibroblasts, which are the cells that make scar tissue, to just calm down. It actively prevents fibrosis. So the new cells actually de-stiffen the old tissue around them.
That's a huge paradigm shift. It means you don't have to replace 100% of the heart tissue to get a systemic benefit.
Yeah.
It's almost like a herd immunity effect, but for cellular youth.
Exactly. You physically flip the environment.
What about the brain, though? The paper mentioned BAG, or regional brain age gap.
The brain is the ultimate challenge for this entire protocol because of the waste clearance issue. The brain doesn't have a normal lymphatic system like the rest of your body does. It has the glymphatic system.
Which is essentially the brain's waste pipes.
Yes, but here's the major catch. The glymphatic system is primarily active during slow-wave sleep. It physically opens up the channels only when you are in deep sleep.
Wait, so if you do this treatment, the timing isn't just about minutes for the flare gun, it's about the patient's circadian rhythm.
The paper explicitly states that the clearance phase must be synchronized with the patient's sleep cycle. If you kill a bunch of zombie neurons and release all their toxic debris while the patient is awake, the pipes are literally closed. You'll completely overwhelm the brain with toxicity. You have to trigger the flush when the drain is actually open.
That is such a wild detail. The surgery schedule is dictated by your deep sleep cycle. It really highlights that you can't just treat the cell in a vacuum. You have to respect the logistics of the entire human system.
It's a holistic engineering problem. You are managing the traffic of an entire city, not just fixing a single building.
So we've gone through the whole theoretical process, prime the stem cells, flush the zombies with smart Velcro magnets, and guide the new cells in with a triple signal. It feels strangely doable. But is it actually stable? I mean, ripping out chunks of microscopic tissue and replacing them sounds incredibly traumatic to the organ.
Well, the author emphasizes that this is mathematically stable. They actually use 3D free boundary problems to model this entire process.
Just a little light calculus to finish us off today.
Exactly right. But essentially, the math proves that the replacement flux, the exact rate at which we add new cells, can perfectly match the clearance rate of the dead ones. The necrotic core, the old tissue, shrinks at a highly predictable rate. It proves that we aren't just crossing our fingers and hoping it works. The numbers say it's a perfectly stable transition. You don't end up with microscopic holes in your tissue.
So zooming out for our listeners, what does this all mean for us?
It means we are fundamentally moving away from the idea of looking for a cure for aging. Aging isn't a disease you cure, it's an entropy problem you manage. This paper proposes turning aging into a manageable maintenance schedule. You go in, you flush a region, you repopulate it, and you move to the next.
Like painting the Golden Gate Bridge. By the time you finally finish painting one end, it's time to start back at the beginning.
Exactly. It's continuous, recursive maintenance.
It's a fascinating look at the future of longevity.
Mhm.
But here's the thought I'm left with, and I really want you to weigh in on this before we wrap up.
Yes.
If this actually works, if we can essentially reset the biological fractal, region by region, flushing out the old and printing in the new. The paper calls it the ship of Theseus for a reason. If I go in and replace my heart cells in 2030, and then my brain cells in 2035, and my liver in 2040, at what point do I actually stop being old? Or more provocatively, for you to think about, am I even the same person at the end of that? Or are we simply engineering a completely new vessel that just happens to carry my name?
That really is the ultimate question, isn't it? When the signal-to-noise ratio is perfect again and the physical parts are brand new, maybe the you that started the process is just the blueprint for the you that finishes it.
Something for you all to think about while you're trying to get that crucial slow wave sleep tonight. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
The pleasure as always.
See you next time.